The film begins with a man playing a violin on his bed. His hands move skillfully, plucking and bowing the strings of the instrument resting against his neck. The man's name is Johnny, and music has flowed through his soul since childhood. He finds immense joy in every note that escapes his violin. Johnny is a street performer, and on this particular day, he is preparing to head to the city station, his usual spot for busking. Meanwhile, in a taxi, a beautiful girl named Ruby gazes out the window, captivated by the vibrant sights of New York City. This is her first time in the city, as she has come to attend the prestigious MSA, a top-tier art school. Ruby has been a dancer since she was young, and her heart swells with gratitude toward her mother, who made it possible for her to pursue her dream of studying at MSA. After saying goodbye to her mother, Ruby heads straight to the principal's office, where she meets Markova. At that moment, Markova explains the rules Ruby must follow during her time at MSA. Once the meeting concludes, Ruby politely excuses herself and leaves. Elsewhere, in a studio, a group of young dancers practices together. Their movements are synchronized and full of energy. Back at the station, Johnny is fully immersed in his performance, pouring his heart into every note. His passion is so palpable that passers-by willingly drop money into his case. Ruby, on her way home by train, catches a fleeting glimpse of Johnny through the window. After finishing his performance, Johnny meets with his lawyer and hands over the money he earned from busking. The lawyer assures him that his legal issues will be resolved soon. Naive and trusting, Johnny believes him without a hint of suspicion. When Ruby arrives at the dormitory, she meets her roommate, Jasmine. It was revealed that Jasmine is a talented second-year student at MSA who, like Ruby, is on a scholarship. The two quickly bond, becoming as close as sisters. That evening, Jasmine invites Ruby to a party with her friends. The scene shifts to Johnny's residence. As he heads to his room, he is stopped by Hayward, another resident of the building. Before Johnny can retreat to his upstairs room, Hayward introduces him to his friends. Each of them has a unique talent, and they all know about Johnny, the guy who plays the violin late into the night. One of them even jokes, asking if Johnny ever sleeps. They all laugh. Then Hayward and his friends break into an impromptu dance performance, leaving Johnny both mesmerized and entertained. At the nightclub, Ruby and Jasmine dance with their friends. For Ruby, this is her first party in New York, and she is determined to enjoy every moment. The next morning, Ruby hurriedly wakes Jasmine, eager to get to school on time. She doesn't want to be late on her very first day. On their way to class, Ruby and Jasmine run into Kyle, who is the top violinist in his class, a talented and handsome young man, though his arrogance is hard to miss. In the classroom, Ruby feels a wave of nervousness, but Jasmine does her best to reassure her. Their first class introduces them to Kramrovsky, their ballet instructor. At first glance, Kramrovsky appears old and frail, but as soon as the ballet practice begins, Ruby realizes he is a strict and demanding teacher who pushes his students to their limits. In their second class, Ruby joins a contemporary dance session. Here, she is scolded by the instructor for making a mistake in her movements, which could have endangered her partner. Ruby apologizes sincerely. Later, by the end of her first day, Ruby rushes to the station to head back to her apartment. At the station, Ruby notices a street performer playing the violin. It's Johnny. She drops $50 into his case, and their eyes meet. Johnny gazes at Ruby, and she smiles back at him. Moments later, the train arrives, and a group of men dressed in black, calling themselves the Village Boys, step out. They challenge a group of construction workers to a dance-off. The tension escalates, and soon, the two groups are locked in an impromptu battle of skills, dazzling the onlookers with their impressive moves. However, the lively atmosphere is disrupted when a pickpocket strikes, snatching a bag from a bystander. In his haste to escape, the thief bumps into Ruby, knocking her to the ground. Johnny, witnessing the scene, quickly sets down his violin and rushes to help Ruby to her feet. But when he turns back, his violin is gone, stolen in the chaos. Shortly after, the police arrive, scattering the dancers in all directions. Ruby urges Johnny to report the theft to the officers, but instead, he slips away. Feeling responsible for the loss of Johnny's violin, Ruby decides to follow him. She asks why he didn't report the theft to the police, but Johnny reacts angrily, telling her to stay out of it. Undeterred, Ruby presses him further, asking why he busks at the station. Eventually, Johnny explains that it's the only way he can earn cash. He reveals that he's from England and doesn't have a visa to stay in New York, which is why he avoids the police. Relieved to hear this, she had initially suspected he might be a fugitive. Ruby softens. The two begin to open up to each other. Johnny shares that he has no one in New York since his grandfather passed away. Touched by his story, Ruby suggests they visit a pawn shop to see if his violin might turn up there. At the shop, Ruby asks the owner if anyone has tried to sell Johnny's violin in the past 17 minutes. The owner, however, becomes hostile, accusing Johnny of being involved in stolen goods. Despite Johnny's attempts to explain, the man angrily shoos them away. Before leaving, Ruby writes down her phone number and hands it to the owner, just in case someone tries to sell the violin there later. When Ruby finally returned to her apartment, she found Jasmine in the bathroom. Jasmine then asked where Ruby was because she came late at night. That's when Ruby told the story of her meeting with Johnny. The next morning, Ruby and her classmates are back in the studio for their contemporary ballet practice. At first, Ruby struggles to keep up with the instructor's demands. She has never danced to contemporary jazz music before, and the unfamiliar rhythm throws her off. By the end of the session, Ruby's teacher pulls her aside and urges her to practice harder. He tells her that mastering contemporary dance is essential if she wants to become a professional dancer. Ruby nods, determined to catch up and prove herself. Meanwhile, at home, Johnny is growing increasingly frustrated. His calls and messages to his lawyer, Neil, have gone unanswered. Suddenly, his phone buzzes with a notification. His email to Neil has bounced back, marked as undeliverable. In a fit of anger, Johnny throws his phone across the room. He decides to take matters into his own hands and rushes to Neil's office. When he arrives, Johnny is stopped by a security guard who asks him to sign the visitor log and state his purpose. Johnny insists he's there to see Neil, the lawyer he's been dealing with for the past 3 months. The guard frowns and informs Johnny that in his 15 years working there, he's never heard of a lawyer named Neil. Johnny refuses to believe it and shows the guard Neil's business card. The guard examines it and declares it a fake. Defeated and furious, Johnny storms out, kicking a trash can in frustration. Back at school, Ruby runs into Kyle and April. Apparently, Kyle is borrowing a violin from the school's inventory since his own instrument is damaged. Inspired, Ruby decides to borrow a violin as well, hoping to replace the one Johnny lost. Shortly after, the caretaker hands her the instrument and asks if she's participating in the upcoming competition, pointing to a brochure on the counter. At that moment, Ruby takes the brochure, her mind racing with possibilities. Later, at his apartment, Johnny receives a call from Simon, his landlord, who demands the overdue rent. Johnny pleads for more time, but Simon threatens to evict him if he doesn't pay soon. Overwhelmed, Johnny has no idea where he'll find the money. Just then, Ruby shows up at his door, holding the violin she borrowed from school. Excitedly, she shows Johnny the brochure for the Peterson Foundation competition. The grand prize includes $25,000, a scholarship to MSA, and a free student visa. She urges Johnny to enter, seeing it as the perfect opportunity for him. Unfortunately, Johnny is unimpressed. He scoffs at the idea, dismissing the competition as a playground for spoiled rich kids. He rants about how music schools are more about politics and appearances than genuine art. Ruby is disappointed by his reaction. She tells him that she sees immense talent in him, but his anger is holding him back. The music he plays is filled with rage, she says, and it overshadows the beauty he could create. Ruby then explains that music, like dance, has the power to connect with people's souls. It can evoke sadness, joy, tears, or laughter. It can inspire. She asks Johnny why he doesn't use his gift to inspire the world. Johnny, however, brushes her off with a casual remark, saying he's not like her. Heartbroken by his indifference, Ruby leaves, her hopes for him fading as she walks away. Feeling guilty and regretful, Johnny chases after Ruby, but it's too late. She's already driven off in a taxi. His shouts fade into the distance, unheard. As he turns back toward his apartment, Hayward and his friends approach, noticing how worn out and defeated Johnny looks. They ask why Johnny hasn't been playing his violin lately, and he explains that it was stolen at the station. Sympathetic, Hayward suggests that Johnny join them to earn some extra money on the side. Meanwhile, Ruby receives a call from Jasmine, who invites her to a party. At the event, April and Kyle are enjoying a plate of food and coffee. Soon, the atmosphere livens up as Kyle begins playing his violin, his skillful performance captivating everyone. All the people dance and celebrate, lost in the music. Back at the apartment, Johnny is busy composing a piece for the competition he's decided to enter. Unbeknownst to Ruby, he's taken her advice to heart and is quietly preparing to prove himself. The next morning at school, Jasmine arrives late to dance class and blames Ruby for not waking her up. Ruby defends herself, saying she tried but Jasmine was too deep in sleep after coming home late the night before. During practice, the two chat continuously, earning a sharp reprimand from Kramrovsky. That evening, Jasmine helps Ruby pick out the perfect outfit for a fundraising gala she's attending with Kyle. At the event, Kyle greets Ruby warmly, and she's awestruck by the grandeur of the occasion. At that moment, Kyle proudly mentions that the event is the result of his hard work and the support of sponsors. Soon, he's called to the stage, leaving Ruby momentarily alone. As she accidentally knocks over a photo on a table, Johnny appears out of nowhere to help her pick it up. Ruby is shocked to see him there. Johnny compliments her stunning appearance, admitting he's working as a server for the night. Not long after, a woman asks Johnny to dance, while a man approaches Ruby for the same. They both join the dance floor, swaying to the music played by Kyle. When the woman notices her husband dancing with Ruby, she urges Johnny to save Ruby from him. Johnny steps in, and they end up dancing together. Surprisingly, Johnny is an excellent dancer. Kyle, watching from the stage, grows visibly jealous of their chemistry. He storms down and confronts Johnny, insulting him and calling him a street beggar who doesn't belong at such an event. Not only that, he also orders Johnny to leave. Johnny, refusing to back down, challenges Kyle to a violin duel. The two face off, their fingers flying across the strings as they pour their hearts into their performances. The crowd is mesmerized, and the energy escalates when Hayward and his friends join in with an impromptu dance routine. The night reaches a fever pitch, but the tension between Johnny and Kyle boils over. They exchange heated words, and Kyle ultimately expels Johnny and his friends from the party, leaving the atmosphere charged with unresolved conflict. The next morning at school, Ruby joins her classmates for their usual ballet practice. After everyone leaves, Ruby stays behind to train one-on-one with Kramrovsky. Unbeknownst to them, Johnny watches from outside the window, observing their session. Kramrovsky praises Ruby's agility and skill, reminding her that every step forward in life comes with challenges. He encourages her to keep learning and growing as a dancer. Once Kramrovsky leaves, Johnny enters the studio and approaches Ruby. He asks to borrow the violin she had offered him earlier, explaining that he's decided to compete in the Peterson competition. Ruby hesitates, unsure if Johnny is disciplined enough to follow through. Johnny reassures her, promising to win the competition and make up for his past mistakes. As a sign of gratitude, he invites Ruby to dinner at his apartment. That evening, Ruby arrives at Johnny's apartment alone. The hallway leading to his room is lined with candles, creating a warm, romantic atmosphere. Inside, Johnny waits for her, the room beautifully arranged. Ruby is stunned and asks if this is his way of apologizing. Johnny nods, and Ruby hands him the violin. Johnny admits that earlier that day was the first time he'd seen her dance, and he was captivated by her grace and beauty. He then reveals his plan for the competition. He wants Ruby to be his dancer. Without hesitation, Ruby agrees. To celebrate, Johnny plays a romantic piece on the violin, dedicated solely to Ruby. She is moved by the music, and the two share a tender moment, their connection deepening as they lose themselves in the romance of the evening. The next morning at school, Jasmine notices Ruby's unusually radiant expression and teases her about it. Soon after, Kyle approaches Ruby, asking her to be his dance partner for the competition. Ruby declines, explaining that she's already committed to performing with Johnny. Kyle is disappointed, confident that he and Ruby could have one together. In the end, he leaves, declaring that he and April will take the top prize and claim all the rewards. After school, Ruby heads straight to Johnny's apartment to practice. She tells him that their main competition will be Kyle and April, but Johnny remains unfazed. He has a brilliant idea and invites Hayward and his crew to join their team. Knowing this, Hayward eagerly agrees, seeing this as an opportunity to showcase street dance to a wider audience. From that day on, they train rigorously, determined to perfect their performance. Meanwhile, at school, Jasmine's habitual tardiness and Ruby's lack of progress in contemporary dance catch the attention of their instructor. They are summoned to the principal's office, where Markova expresses her disappointment. She warns Jasmine that despite her talent, continued lateness could lead to her expulsion. Turning to Ruby, Markova urges her to take her training more seriously, emphasizing her potential as a contemporary dancer. She notes that Ruby's movements have become stiff lately, likely due to her involvement with Hayward's street dance crew for the Peterson competition. The next morning, Ruby receives a call from her mother, who excitedly informs her that she will be attending the competition Ruby is participating in. Ruby is overjoyed to hear this, but quickly ends the call when she notices the time for her class is approaching. She rushes to wake Jasmine, who is still in bed. Jasmine, having only fallen asleep at 4 a.m., immediately protests, but Ruby insists, reminding her that if they're late again, Jasmine could be expelled and Ruby's scholarship might be revoked. Ruby urges Jasmine to fight for her dreams, and eventually, Jasmine relents. Together, they head to school, where April is already practicing her dance routine. April invites them to the Peterson competition to watch her performance with Kyle. The following day, Ruby is preparing for the Peterson competition when her phone rings. It's the pawn shop owner, who informs her that he's found Johnny's classic violin and asks her to come pick it up. Meanwhile, Johnny and his crew are also getting ready to head to the competition venue. However, on their way, Johnny is suddenly stopped by the police and taken to the station for questioning about Neil, the lawyer who had scammed him. At the competition venue, Ruby and her team grow increasingly anxious as Johnny fails to show up. He had promised to meet them by 6:30 p.m., but his phone goes unanswered. It turns out he left it at home. As the first performers take the stage, Ruby and her friends grow more worried. With only 5 minutes left before April and Kyle are scheduled to perform, Johnny is still nowhere to be found. One of the team members suggests giving up, but Hayward reassures them, insisting that Johnny wouldn't let them down. Finally, April and Kyle take the stage, captivating the audience with their flawless performance. Just as the organizers call Ruby's team to prepare for their turn, panic sets in. Ruby urges everyone to stay calm, convinced that Johnny will arrive in time. Backstage, the tension mounts as the seconds tick away. Then, with only 1 minute to spare, Johnny bursts in, apologizing profusely for the delay. At that moment, Ruby hands him his long-lost violin, and Johnny pulls her into a grateful embrace. Soon after, the announcer invites them to the stage, and Johnny begins to play his original composition. Fortando. The performance is unlike anything the audience has seen before, a mesmerizing blend of classical and contemporary music, paired with a fusion of ballet and New York street dance. At that moment, Ruby dances with breathtaking grace, her movements perfectly synchronized with the music. Johnny pours his heart into the violin, his performance captivating the judges and audience alike. Hayward and his crew deliver stunning dance moves, their energy electrifying the stage. The combination of ballet and street dance creates a visual and auditory masterpiece that leaves everyone in awe. As the performance ends, there's a moment of stunned silence. Ruby, Johnny, and the team exchange nervous glances, fearing the worst. But then, after 10 tense seconds, the audience erupts in a thunderous applause, rising to their feet in a standing ovation. Ruby's mother and Jasmine cheer with pride, and even their teachers are moved by the brilliance of the performance. Kyle and April, watching from the sidelines, grow uneasy, realizing the magnitude of their competition. Soon, all the participants are called back to the stage for the announcement of the winners. After a tense deliberation, the judges declare Johnny, Ruby, and Hayward as the champions. Johnny steps forward to deliver a heartfelt speech, thanking his team and announcing that he will share the $25,000 prize with them, acknowledging that without their support, this victory wouldn't have been possible. As the crowd cheers, Johnny and Ruby share a tender kiss on stage, their bond stronger than ever. Moral lesson from the story: if you're going to busk in a train station, make sure your violin isn't the only thing you're good at: dancing, dodging pickpockets. And charming dancers are also useful skills. And remember, if a lawyer asks for your money, just play him a sad song instead.